I've been told to watch this show for a while. Ever since I finished Cowboy Bebop, this has constantly been recommended, and I was really interested but could never find a place to watch it. But now that I have, and since I recently finished it, it has become a goal of mine to get people to watch this show and partake on this amazing journey. Ladies and gentlemen, this is why you should watch Samurai Champloo.
I'd rather die on my feet with my head held high.
Well said. I agree with him.
Very well then. I'll grant you.
If you know me, you know I am a sucker for these types of shows. You always get to see a character's best when they are barely making it, scrounging around for some money or food on a long journey. It makes every step along the way seem to count that much more, even if it's as simple as finding enough cash for the next meal. I also love the style of episodic adventures held together by some continuous storyline, usually something they are working toward, long or short term. It almost always makes each episode feel truly unique and allows you to experience all sorts of stories along the way. But maybe I should start at the beginning. Samurai Champloo is an action comedy anime released in 2005, directed by Shinichiro Watanabe, the same director behind Cowboy Bebop and Space Dandy. Just by that track record, you know this show is going to be great. And while the show does have many aspects of comedy, it doesn't fully dive into the idea and has many different tonal changes throughout the show, but I'll talk more about that later. Right from the intro music, I knew this show was going to be great. The first episode was amazing as well. It brought in our three main characters, Mugen, Jin, and Fu, all while hooking you with amazing fights and interesting characters. These characters come together in an explosion of chaos and all agree to help Fu find the samurai that smells of sunflowers, kickstarting their journey. A journey that would allow for many people to be met, places to be seen, and fights to be won. So let me begin by talking about the fights. The fights in this show are some of the best I have seen. Simply put, they are great. I always say that some of my favorite fights are the most grounded. The ones where you can feel the punches and everything shown feels weighted. It brings a sense of immersion that two godlike beings slamming each other through walls simply doesn't bring. Although, I enjoy my fair share of that too. And I can say the fights in this show do not disappoint. The fighting animation is flawless. The weaves, punches, and sword slashes are all so seamless. And that also has a lot to do with fight choreography. The movements of each character and their interactions with backgrounds and environments all culminates in fights that seem so distinct from one another. I can still picture in my head the movement of these samurais, the swords clash in flurries of sparks. And if you still doubt the fights, well, they even made something as simple as two bugs fighting look cool. Seriously, you can't look at this and say it isn't at least slightly interesting. And with fights this good, I would even go as far as to recommend the show just for them. But lucky for you, that's not all the show has to offer. So let's talk about the characters. To start, I just want to say how cool they are. Like seriously, they are the definition of badass. At least Jin and Mugen. Fu is cool too, but I will say that it took me a little while to warm up to her. At the beginning, she was constantly talking about promises and the Sunflower Samurai, and that got old really fast, especially since she wasn't fleshed out all that much at the time. Although I will say she started to get better, especially around episode 6, and eventually she talked about those things less and less, and when she did bring them up, it wasn't as obnoxious as before. Looking back in retrospective, I think the reason I didn't immediately like Fu was because she was constantly captured and wasn't really pulling her weight. But as time went on, you could see her mature and grow in a realistic fashion. And that's what a lot of characters are, realistic. The people you meet along the way all seem pretty real, and none are just blatantly evil, they are all fueled by nuanced motives instead. If it be because of circumstances, revenge, glory, money, women, ideas, religion, or just to make a name for themselves. You rarely, if at all, meet a character who is evil just for the sake of being evil. It's a nice mix-up and makes you interested in why each character is acting the way they are. And with our main characters and many side characters as well, it was interesting to see them wrapped up in their own struggles of their past. While the past would often stay mysterious, it would keep you engaged and wanting more, dying to know about the complexities that haunt them, while the story slowly and realistically shows you more about the characters at the right times in their adventure. often through their interactions with others or through song. I personally like the messages portrayed through song. It offered a way for characters to speak their troubles and convey their past while not being an abrupt way of exposition. Because truthfully speaking, some of the songs were quite beautiful. It was this traditional style of song, if I'm not mistaken, and it was very atmospheric in its own way. Which brings me over to the soundtrack. Yet again, the soundtrack is another amazing aspect of this show. It almost constantly plays in the background and builds such an atmosphere. The closest thing I can compare it to is lo-fi, which as far as I know, Samurai Champloo's soundtrack was one of the original creators of the lo-fi genre as a whole. Which is really crazy to think. Imagine just how monumental it is for a soundtrack to create a whole genre of music in a sense. And it was always nice to hear the wavy chords bouncing around with the occasional bass playing in the background of fights or just everyday activities. Seriously, the soundtrack is amazing. Not many other ways to say it. And truthfully, the soundtrack elevates the show. Like, it would be great without it, but it just makes it that much better. And we can't forget the intro and outro, both of which are great. Trust me when I say this, but I did not skip the opening once. I know it may not be everyone's cup of tea, but at least for me, I can say I enjoyed it. And it's not often that I don't skip an opening at all. And the outro is great too. It's so soothing and soft, but then becomes this upbeat rhythm, and well, I liked it a lot. And I mentioned in my notes about episode 12's outro being crazy good, so be on the lookout for that one. Now, the music is only one part of the presentation, so let's talk about the art style. First off, I thought the art style was really good. It's usually one of the first things I notice about a show, and I can say I wasn't disappointed. The show hops around from these colorful hues depending on the mood, area, or scene. And to be totally honest, some of the scenes are art. They are straight up beautiful. Since the show takes place during the Edo period of Japan, you get to see a lot of wilderness and old towns lit up by lanterns giving off this bronze lighting. It really created such a beautiful atmosphere and aesthetic. And I don't like using that word all that much because I feel like it's overused in a sense, but it really applies here. I found myself transported into a whole nother world sometimes while the scenes conveyed so much without ever uttering a single word. Like I said before, it can be pure art. The art style to me is the embodiment of lo-fi. It's this relaxing, almost beautiful scenery with vibrant hues of oranges or blues shaded by this grainy cover with the bounciness of swords clashing from samurai duels. I really don't think there is a better way to describe it. Now, I mentioned before I would talk about the humor, so let's go over it now. To start things off, this show can be really funny when it wants to be. A lot of the jokes landed, and it made for some really hilarious moments that had me laughing out loud. I don't mean a chuckle or a cracked smile, but full-on laughter. Because there are some really funny jokes and gags in here. One of my favorite examples of this was episode 23, Baseball Blues. I loved that episode. It had our main characters have to play baseball against some Americans who wanted to trade illegally to get them to leave, and boy, was it great. The episode was genuinely one of my favorites, and it was super funny. I laughed basically the entire time. In my opinion, it was one of the best episodes and has made me laugh more than some comedies. But the show isn't all jokes, although it does sometimes have trouble balancing themes. For instance, you'll have a masterpiece of an episode that has some dark and dreary themes with characters fighting to the death, to the next episode being filled with jokes and interdimensional zombies. There are times where the show does this right, however. Certain episodes, specifically funny ones, act as barriers for the serious episodes, as to not overload you and to keep you somewhat of an upbeat feeling. After all, you don't want the whole show being dreary and depressing. That's not to say it shies away from that, however. If anything, it's the opposite. It embraces some really deep themes and topics while showing the cruel reality of the world that many shows often miss out on. Themes such as exploitation by religion, going to God only when you need him, how lucrative religion can be, foreigners in Japan, how the past can affect your future, coming to terms with reality, and so much more. Seriously, you can pick any episode from this show and pick apart a multitude of themes. The ones I mentioned were really only off the top of my head. Specifically, I really like the takes on God and the spread of Christianity. It takes into consideration the past of the church and how lucrative it can be. It also shows how some of the people you look up to or aspire to be may not always be who you think they are. But those are my takes and opinions on the questions presented. I'm sure many people had many different ideas or opinions on what was shown, which is great because it adds a certain sense of personal touch to each person's viewing experience. Another thing I really liked were some of the quotes, so I thought I would share them.
The only people who say money doesn't matter are the ones who have more money than they'll ever need.
Or on episode 16.
Death leaves no beautiful corpses.
I thought I would share these with you to maybe sway your mind to watch the show, but I also just really like them. On the topic of things I liked, I really enjoyed the side stories. I talked about this slightly when talking about the side characters, but it was really fun to learn about all these side characters as our main characters met them along their journey. It almost makes you feel like you're traveling along as well, and it was really entertaining. Like a painter trying to find their way to Holland, or a man trying to spread ideas he found in China. Were all so intriguing. There were also these little tidbits of historical information given throughout the show, usually to deepen the context of the episode, which I found very interesting and widened the scope of the show a bit. It almost made it more grounded in reality, which widened the scope of the world building as well. The same can be said for the traditional Japanese stories, songs, and ideas mixed in. It brought a sense of historical realness, which made me feel like this was a journey that actually happened in a sense. I'm not sure if that sounds crazy, but it did for me. Also, it had a decent review episode. They went over a diary recapping their adventures with some extra information in a voiceover style, and it is one of the only recap episodes I can remember watching fully. And the last one I think was Avatar: The Last Airbenders, and well, that's the best recap I have ever seen. So that goes to show just how good this recap was. It wasn't anything crazy or super new, but it was still entertaining to say the least. Now, I would be lying if I said there was nothing I didn't like in this show, because trust me, it's not perfect. For starters, at the beginning of the show, I thought the conversation sounded a little odd, because real people don't talk like this. Although it did get better throughout the show, but maybe it may have been because I watched the dubbed version? Now, I know some people probably got angry realizing I watched it in dub, and for the most part, I've watched basically every show with subtitles except a certain few, but shows, especially like these, I like to watch in English. I did it with Cowboy Bebop, I did it with Space Dandy, and now I did it with Samurai Champloo, because it just gives such a different feel to the show, plus the dubs are usually really good for these types of shows. And that's honestly the first complaint I've had about the dubs so far with them, so I'm gonna stick with it, at least for these three. With almost everything else, I'll stick to subtitles, don't worry. I also thought the way all the characters came together really didn't make sense, but I kinda give this one a pass since it was needed to start the story, plus they make subtle jokes about it near the end of the show. I also didn't really like Fu at the beginning, but I already went over that and how she progressed throughout the story, so that also gets another pass. Episode 22 was weird to say the least. And it wasn't bad, actually far from it, but it just felt so far removed from the rest of the show that it sort of stuck out and was definitely the worst episode in the series. This next issue contains super minor spoilers, but if you want to go into the show completely blind, skip to the time on screen. I'm guessing everyone who wanted to skip already did. Now, this next one may have just been me, but I thought it kind of sucked how no one new entered the traveling group outside of our main three. Now, I don't really think this is spoilers, but I put one anyway because they make it pretty obvious and you pick up on it around the first couple of episodes. It makes the story decently predictable, as in, I know these characters aren't going to be in the next episode, so there are really only a set number of outcomes. But that concludes the things I don't like, so we should have everyone back now. I would really hate to end this video on a negative since it's such a great show and I'm trying to get you to watch it, so I want to talk about something I really liked in the show. And that is just how badass it is. No matter what the feeling of the episode is, you know it's going to be sick. The one constant of the show is just how consistently badass it is. If it's conveyed through its fights, conversations, or just some certain scenes, you know you're in for a treat whenever you click onto an episode. Because this show is truly amazing. I found myself not wanting it to end even though I knew it eventually had to. But I'm glad I got to partake on such a great adventure with some truly amazing characters. This is one of those shows that I would recommend to anyone, so that they can experience the incredible journey that is Samurai Champloo.